All right, I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Dion Reynolds. I'm program coordinator in the Upper Mid Center, and I will be doing a quick introduction for Dr. Kaiya Shivers. I'll be passing it off to her to lead us this evening. So if y'all don't know, Kaiya Shivers is a professor up at NYU, and she is our artist in residence and faculty in residence at UNCW this semester. So we are very grateful to have her provide us with a lot of knowledge over the time that she's going to be here. A little bit about Kaiya as a response to seeing food insecurity. And I'm gonna be going back and forth between reading and also letting people into the chat. So excuse me. Food insecurity while reporting on the coronavirus pandemic in Italy. She launched an online database to connect consumers to Black farmers in the US in 2020. The listing known as the Black Farmers Index is the largest free, public, and most comprehensive digital database with over 800 traditional and non-traditional growers in the system. She received her PhD from the School of Communication, Information, and Library Studies at Rutgers University, and her MA from Clark Atlanta. Oh, I thought somebody was saying Clark Atlanta Africana Women's Studies. The core of her research explores how members of the African diaspora imagine and represent Blackness through their use of media. Currently, she focuses on how diasporans construct and perform identity by way of Nollywood and West African film industry. And the list goes on and on as far as Dr. Kaiya Shivers. So I'm going to pass it off to her, and I hope you all enjoy this conversation tonight and this presentation. So without further ado, y'all can give a Zoom clap for Dr. Kaiya. But
Thank
I'll to you, and I'll mute.
All right. So I don't have to say anything else, but thank you. I would like to thank the Upper Mid Cultural Center and the Anthropology Department. Both of these parts of UNCW are hosting me. So without further ado, let's get down to it, because I really want to have enough time for us to do a Q&A or a discussion. However it evolves, I'm very open. I'm sharing my screen now. I am a creative, so it's everywhere. I just wanted to warn you. So if you see something, okay, here we go. All right. Okay, so this presentation takes you on how Black Farmers Index more intimately, how it started. At the same time, it talks about some of the methodologies that were used, and some of the data or information that has come out of the project, which is a little over a year old. So it's very new. Let's get into it. All right. All right, so I first wanted to start and say that this is what I consider ancestral work. For me, even though I said earlier, I was raised in Los Angeles. Both of my parents are from the South. My mother is from Lafayette, Louisiana. My father is from Vicksburg, Mississippi. However, his family actually originally came from the Birmingham, Alabama area. And both of sides of my family at some point were kicked or forced out of the South, portions of them, as a result of the white domestic terrorism that took place in both of those states. On my mother's side, my grandmother, who is from St. Martinville, Louisiana, which is a city, if you know Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, there actually is a Black version that's celebrated in St. Martinville, Louisiana. So that its most prominent event, but also in St. Martinville, Louisiana, the first Black man to be acquitted for killing a white man happened. Can you hear me?
You call me?
Oh, somebody, I hear somebody's thing. So in the state of Louisiana, in St. Martinville, the first Black man to be acquitted for killing a white man in self-defense happened. And that was my great grandfather, Furnace Jones. The case was so monumental that it actually was used for many years after in defense when you had Black people defending themselves against the death penalty. On my father's side, his family was from Alabama. One of his great uncles was a preacher who protested against the peonage system, the growing incarceration system after the emancipation of Black people. Subsequently, and they owned a farm, a lot of acreage, a lot of land. They were ran off their land. Many of the men were killed. So I come from that lineage. And so over decades, many of my family members moved out of that area. My father's family traveled what was considered the natural migration pattern for Mississippi. And that side of the family lives in the Chicago and Rockford area. And my mother's side of the family traveled the migration pattern of a lot of Louisianians. And so they're located in northern, the Bay Area, California, and in Southern California, where I grew up. So I think it's important that we talk about ancestors and seeing the work that we do is ancestral work, so we are able to move forward. These are some of the people who have been highlighted, some of the growers who have been highlighted on Black Farmers Index. I'll talk about like, how do we do that? So as you can see, these farms come from throughout the United States. We have a variety of ages as well. We have, it's very gender inclusive, and they grow a variety of things. You have mushroom foragers, beekeepers, apiaries, vegetable producers, ranchers, crabbers, fisher folk. So you have the gamut of different people producing food. In this conversation or in this presentation, often when we talk about Black farmers, and I would say particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, it has been spoken of from a point of view of, in my opinion, of being invisible or being erased and being powerless. And so I try to be or intentional in my presentations to show you the other side of the resilience of Black farmers and what they are doing and what they have done in order to sustain, even though the numbers have dwindled. The work that we do at Black Farmers Index is what I call a triad of justices: food justice, social justice, and economic justice. You cannot have food justice, in my opinion, unless you have some semblance of economic justice. And you can't have economic justice if you do not have social justice. And we could talk about what that looks like and what that means. What is the Black Farmers Index? Okay, so I think, hold on for a minute. Oh, there, it was supposed to be this one. This is me in Italy. I came back from Italy in July. So I was in Italy for 2 years. And while I was in Italy, as Dion said, I was the only Black female reporter, the only Black reporter reporting on location about COVID-19 in Italy. And so while I was there, in the southern part of Italy, which is Sicily, Calabria, there was a growing food accessibility issue. The South is where most of the food is grown in Italy. However, because of the poverty, a lot of people cannot afford the food. And so people began to loot the stores and the grocery stores in order to get food. And so I said to myself, well, if this is happening in Southern Italy, and if COVID hits the United States the way that I think is going to hit the United States, what is going to happen to the population that has the least access to food? And that's Black folk. And as a journalist, I was a little exhausted about reporting of all of the dire circumstances in Italy. I wanted to do something. I wanted to create a solution. And this is how the idea of creating a directory that directs consumers straight to farmers or growers began. I don't know how to go back. Let's see if I can go back. Okay, sorry. Black Farmers Index was established in March 2021. After some research I started doing about farmers, and I'll talk about the type of research I did. It is all Black women led. In July of, let me pull this back. It was established March 2020, my bad. And it became a charitable organization in July 2020, last year. Our initial goal was to list 10% of farmers, which is roughly about 4,000 to 4,200 farmers to date. We have 957 farmers on the list. Another one of our commitments is to provide as much exposure to farmers and to drive consumers to farmers. So we create a series of different ways to do that. And another thing that we saw was very needed was to construct more accurate reports and stories and data about farmers. Because when people say Black farmers, they think Black farmers are a monolith. But just like soul food and just like Black people, it is a very, very, very diverse community. When I formed the organization in July 2020, excuse me, not 2021, I brought on my sisters. Ayana and Amara are my younger sisters. And because farming is very much kept in the family, I wanted to kind of keep those same structures in talking about the Black Farmers Index. And my sister Ayana, actually in the middle, is an urban farmer. She's been farming for about 6 or 7 years now in Maryland. All right, so now we can move forward. There are 4 pillars that we focus on Black Farmers Index: access to capital, access to land, dissemination and collecting information and marketing of growers. Right now, what we focus on is information and marketing. On the information side, it is the directory that is blackfarmersindex.com. We also have what we call a back-end database, where what you see on Black Farmers Index is not all of the information about farmers. We have a wealth of information about farmers, which helps us create narratives about them. We also provide a newsletter to the farmers on our list. And in terms of the marketing, we have a very active Instagram page. We have Facebook and Twitter, but we have not really got into those, but we have an active IG page. As well, we have an event called Black Farmer and a Chef, where we get ingredients from from farmers, and we give them to chefs, and then they cook a dinner. There was a North Carolina farmer that was a part of the last one we did, Apex Seafood, which is located in Apex, North Carolina. We also, hello? Somebody needs to put on mute. Okay, thank you. We also blog about the farmers, and I have a company called excuse me?
2:30.
Oh, 2:30. I don't know. I think you're on the wrong one. Okay, so we also write news articles. Let's move forward. Okay, so this is the part. Look, I was tired this weekend. This is the part in terms of how do you map Black growers. When I tell you it's a labor of love, this has been much harder than me doing my ethnographic work. And I had a 6-year ethnography on my research. So I started with what is called snowball sampling, asking people that I knew, do you know any Black farmers? Do you know any growers? And that pilot sampling led me to understand that the whole idea of growers is so much more profound and complex than somebody owning land. All of the other types of collecting information is probably half of what we do. It is a combination of what I call analog and digital collecting of information. And so we have scoured agricultural programs, USDA reports, A lot of it is what we call digging in the dirt. After we began to organize, after we collected the information, the first iteration of Black Farmers Index was 150 farmers. I had to decide how I was going to actually organize it. And so I created, I used the USDA's regional information, and I kind of tweaked it and color coded the regions. My intentions for keeping the same regions, one of them was to encourage people who wanted to buy from Black growers to consider the region instead of just locally. Because what I began to find out, in some places, farmers or growers are far and few between.
Dr. Shivers, if I may ask a question.
Yes.
Emmanuel Harris here. You mentioned growers and you
Mhm.
mentioned farmers. Is there a distinction between the two, or are you using them
Yeah.
interchangeably?
Yes, I do not use them interchangeably. Thank you so much. So that's part of what I discovered in terms of talking about Black farmers, Black growers. A Black farmer is somebody who farms and sells produce, and they actually have what is identified as farm land, the traditional farm land. A grower is somebody who does produce food and sells the food, but they do it on what is not traditionally land, or it might not be land at all. For example, somebody who raises prawns in Mississippi, or somebody who grows mushrooms in the timber forest of Tennessee. So I had to expand that language. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for that question. So that's why in the criteria I put you had to sell what you grow, harvest, forage, or raise. And I also, as another part of the Black Farmers Index, are also beekeepers and apiaries, which is also not considered a farm. So we have fish farms, apiaries, we have people in aquaculture as well. So I decided to include everybody because they are part of the food ecosystem. All right, so here is some of the information that has been gathered. I want to remind you, we are, like I said, about a little over a year old. This is rough data, I would call it, but these are some of the things that we began to cultivate out of the information we have. So in my talks, and this is something that actually has come from somebody from the USDA who is exceptionally credible, who told me that the farming system, the agricultural system, as it stands right now, is crumbling, and that there will be a heavy reliance in the future of medium to small sized farms. In the past, there has been a heavy commercial farming and monocrop farming where you just grow soybeans or you just grow cotton. The decades of doing that has actually damaged a lot of the soil. And so a lot of the food that we eat is nutrient deficient. And it honestly, it's kind of very symbolic to where we are in the United States today. As well, the commercial farming has led to a lot of environmental waste. And so a lot of our farmland has been destroyed as a result of that. So what we do know is historically, Black farmers have stood at the forefront of a lot of environmental justice issues for several reasons. One, a lot of environmental issues happen in Black and Brown communities. In North Carolina in particular, they talk about the pig farming, the commercial pig farming that has leaked in to smaller farms, and the toxic waste that has happened in North Carolina. And so North Carolina has a legacy of fighting. In Mississippi, the chicken farmers have been fighting in terms of what is it to raise healthy chickens. Also, we discovered that Black farmers, and about 45% of the farmers on Black Farmers Index actually use what is considered organic or healthy or sustainable growing techniques. And that is because a lot of the farmers are not subsidized by the USDA. And so they live really on the fringes of the agribusiness. So they maintain their crops using natural ways of growing, non-invasive tools, and also repurposing farm equipment. For example, if you go on some of the farmer sites or social media, a lot of these farmers brag about how some of their tractors were inherited by their grandparents. So even though at first this might appear that they're using old equipment, repurposing farm equipment is something that is going to happen, right? Another thing, this is some information about what we found out on our index is that digitally Georgia and North Carolina farms have the highest representation. Mississippi has the highest number of collective farmers. And that's when farmers in an area get together, put their produce together, and they sell at different markets. About 35% of our growers are women. Most of our growers are urban or smaller farms, but that's not it. I talked about the organic. In Texas and Mississippi, you have the highest number of ranchers. There's actually a very strong ranching community in Texas. And they keep everything tight to the chest. Legacy farmers are those older farmers that are like 70, 80, 90 years old. And they're kind of split in terms of if they want exposure or not because of the years of exploitation and attacks that they received. And also there is a general distrust of the USDA across the board.
What's your definition of a small farmer?
You know what? I don't have that definition at that time. Thank you so much. I have to do that. I let people self-identify. So if people told me that they had a small farm and that's how they described it, that's how we wrote it down. We haven't collected that data in terms of the acreage, but the USDA they have definitions of what's considered medium, small commercial farms. So here's some other information that we have in terms of harvesting the data. Farmers have had to create very innovative ways of growing and selling their food, which is what I talked about with Dr. Harris earlier.
In Kaya's lecture.
Excuse me? Oh, hold on, Palmer, we hear you. Okay. Secondly, we also found out that there's a lot of what we are identifying as collective growing, community gardens, growing collectives, people who are just starting to farm or starting to grow, coming together. There's also a revamping of mobile markets and CSAs. CSAs are the community supported agricultural systems where you get the boxes of produce and it's delivered to your house or you pick it up. And I already said medium to small size farms will be critical in the future. So the last thing that was, I would say, very prominent is the role that growers and farmers, Black farmers played in action activism in Black entrepreneurial spaces. A lot of people don't know that after the emancipation of Black folk, it was the farmers and the crafts people who actually were the ones who held a lot of the wealth and were the ones to actually, when the Freedmen banks, the banks for Black folks began, these are the ones who are putting in their money, mostly the farmers and the craftspersons. And so there's a serious investment in community and Black empowerment coming from Black farmers. That's why when you meet some of these Black farmers, they are very cantankerous and resilient. But as well, farmers are critical in voting rights. I don't know if you all have heard about the role that farmers had in the Black Panther Party, in naming the Black Panther Party in Oakland, and how that comes from a block of farmers in Alabama, Lowndes County, Alabama, who asked civil rights activists to help them get more voting rights because the white Democratic bloc down there was extremely racist. At that time, when you voted in some places, because there was a lot of illiteracy, you voted actually by icon. So the white Democratic Party's icon was a hen, a white cock. And so the Black farmers, in their response, decided to have their iconography as a Black Panther. At the time, Stokely Carmichael, who renamed himself Kwame Ture, was one of the SNCC people in the who was helping the farmers, and he took that idea around and pop up in Oakland, and the Black Panther Party was conceived. And also the Marvel Comics Black Panther gets its identity from that as well. Fannie Lou Hamer, civil rights activist, was very rooted in justice for farmers. And recently in the presidential elections, it was the rural counties in Georgia that flipped, which consist of Black farmers. The longest, I'm gonna finish a little bit, the longest, what do you call this? Lawsuit, Pigford versus Glickman, is Black farmers. As well, one of the hugest contentions right now is the stimulus package that is directed towards farmers of color, not just Black farmers. And so Black farmers are already suing because there's a lot of contention around that. If you have any questions, we could talk about that later. I want to speed it up because I want to do the Q&A. So overall, we see what we need, and what we hear from farmers is that there needs to be an ecosystem that is created. So on one hand, as there is continued pressure for these justices that I talked about in the beginning, there also must be a re-education of people about the cost of food. A lot of our food is subsidized by the federal government. And so what we would pay if it wasn't would be far higher. We have got to begin to get comfortable with food cost prices going up, as well with this idea that if you want to be or live like healthier, you're gonna have to pay more for food, and perhaps even begin to grow something. To grow something. As well, in terms of the ecosystems, this is a takeaway that I got out of Italy. In Italy, almost, I would say about every 4 or 5 blocks, there is an outdoor stall for markets. Some run in the morning, some run from the morning to afternoon, and then there are night markets. That is something that must be implemented in order to get more business to these farmers, and as well as deal with some of these food issues, deserts that we have in our communities. As well, processing machines. A lot of the farmers might grow food or harvest or raise cattle, but they don't have the facilities to process them for commercial selling. So that's an issue. I have some other stuff, collaborations between food companies, and as well, a growing industry, just like in the hemp and cannabis industry, are jobs and businesses that do not touch the food. Farmers need things simple as a marketing package, somebody to manage their website, to have a website, manage their social media. We should not expect farmers to do all of that, and so there are a lot of like young folk right now online. This is where you can find some of the ways where you can help. Here are some other things we discovered. The land is being multi-purposed. There's a call for, right now, as the USDA is assessing farmers, they're using a lot of technology, especially in COVID, but a lot of these Black farmers don't have access to technology. So that is a problem. We discovered what we call niche farming communities that are growing, women farmers, faith farming communities. There is a rise in millennial farmers. That's what you see a lot on IG, a lot of millennial farmers or Generation X farmers. And lastly, I'll say this, is we need to think about how we sustain our growers. A lot of you might not know this, but a lot of farmers are on food stamps. A lot of farmers have serious mental health issues and serious debt, have never taken a vacation. So we need to be thinking about ways in order to sustain the farmers, to sustain our food. So here are some ideas that we offer at Black Farmers Index: collective paid vacations, community subsidies, health plans. If you're a doctor or a dentist, set up a mobile clinic. As well, farmers need help in terms of navigating the banking system. And overall, I think we all just need to get comfortable with growing something and know that this is a long road ahead. It took us a long of generations to get to where we are, so it will require generations for us to become aligned and be whole. But we must restore justice to Black farmers to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I ran over, I apologize. I'm over here sweating. So this is the Q&A. And if you have any questions, please, I am open, or you just want to talk.
Dr. Chavez, let me say this. Thank you, because the information that you shared, the timing was apropos. We have been talking in Africana Studies, Intro to Africana Studies. We talked about it today, about agriculture and that coming out of Africa and us bringing it from the mother fatherland all the way to the United States. So, and then we also early on in the year talked about the Freedmen's Bureau and that piece. So I'm glad you were able to tie all those pieces together. So right on time. My question for you is, one, talking about some of the agriculture and plants and things that we brought from the mother fatherland here, were there specific things that you were seeing farmers grow across the land that originated in Africa? And then two, looking at North Carolina, for example, in Raleigh, they have the huge farmers market, right? That they do every day. I've gone a couple of times and I've yet to see folks of color at that market selling. It's predominantly white, which is quite interesting for me. And I'm thinking about, how do we get more folks of color involved in those spaces who are farmers or who are growers to be there to sell their products? So two questions for you.
Okay, so I'll start answering, but because I'm not 100% ensconced in Wilmington, if there's anybody locally that could help answer the question. But I did actually, are you talking about the Riverfront Market, Farmers Market? I did go, and a brother by the name of Cedric Harris, is that his last name? What's Cedric's last name? But he told me, no, that's not the farmers market you want to go to. There's another one. And so I want to send a shout out, because there's a farm called Freedom Dreams Farm, and it's owned by Oriana Bolden. And so I found her, and she's actually, I'm proof. She has an Airbnb, and I'm staying at her Airbnb while I'm doing my visiting scholarship. So, there's truth in this. But so let me talk about what the first thing, what was brought. So let me just say this. In the United States, the agricultural community was a combination of African and Native growers, right? Because when Africans were coming to the United States, they had to find food that was similar to the food that they ate. For example, grits, what is grits, which is, maize, is actually fufu in West Africa, right? So like, these are some of the crossovers, but what you're talking about, they call it ethnic crops. Ethnic crops. A lot of Black farmers invest in watermelon, collard greens, turnips, okra. These are things that definitely okra and some versions of watermelon are coming from Africa, and rice, specific types of rice. I'm pretty sure, or maybe some of you have heard some of the stories that are reemerging about how when women were caught, when they came over from Africa, they braided rice in their hair, and they planted the rice that was left over because some of it was eaten, but they planted it in the United States. Hence, North Carolina is a rice. The Carolinas is actually, so the United States actually had booms of money from agriculture. Carolina was rice and indigo. And so this is a side note, is so mathematically accurate the rice fields were in South Carolina and North Carolina, it was comparable to the pyramids, right? So now what you have, so those ethnic crops, depending on how they're harvested, are what we call heirloom. It's heirloom produce. And so that actually is now a thing in agriculture. Is in the Carolinas specifically, I forgot the watermelon, but somebody found seeds from in the times of slavery. And it's a white farm. It's a descendant of a slave owner. Slave owners found seeds, are now growing the watermelon and selling it as like these delicacies. So it's rice and watermelon, I know definitely for sure. And also peanuts. Peanuts is an African crop as well. Specifically in North Carolina, I'm just learning the terrain. So I don't know it, so I don't want to pre-talk. But what I have from what has been told to me is that there still is an issue with segregation and how resources are given and how space is given and where the space is given. Hence why you see certain people at farmers market. And it's kind of like this thing of, well, if you don't say anything, we won't say anything and we won't do anything type of thing. So that's my kind of like superficial reading of the tea leaves.
Thank you. You echoed a lot of what we talked about in class. Spot on. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Shivers, I have a quick question if you don't mind.
Yes.
You mentioned that the commercial monocrop system is facing a collapse in the country.
Yes.
I teach a lot of agriculture embedded in my classes. I'm over in the environmental science department. Can you suggest some data I can use in my classes supporting that assertion? Because that's dynamite information, and I'd love to share that with the students.
Okay, I can say this. I don't have the data, but I was speaking to a very credible source in the USDA who said that. A very, very credible source. If I could come across some information, I will give it to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't know if I should have said it, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to speak that truth. But yes, there's in the commercial monocrops. It's not going to be what it is anymore. It just simply cannot be that. And so there's going to be a reliance on these medium to small sized growers.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, somebody has something in the chat. Oh, wow.
That's one of my students. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.
Okay, can you explain the stimulus package for farmers of color? Okay, so I hope I can say this very quickly. I wish there was a sister on the line who could help. Her name is Jillian Highshaw. She does a lot of work. So in order to, as the stimulus package was being prepared, there was a push for Black farmers to get some type of relief, because under the Trump administration, 99% of the stimulus money to farmers went to white farmers. 99%. All right. And so the Black farming community, who has always been very vocal about injustices, and all of the organizations that support them and speak on their behalf, had been pushing and lobbying for some type of relief aid, because Black farmers were starting to, their land was starting to go into foreclosure during this time. And so the Biden administration, with Vilsack, who's the current agricultural secretary, decided to carve out something for Black farmers. That's how it started. Congress rejected it. Okay. So they came back to the table and said, well, why don't we have a bill for farmers of color? And we will include all non-white farmers. That was the bill that was passed. $4 billion to relief aid, for loan relief aid, and $1 billion to programs to help get more farmers. Well, shortly thereafter that was passed, white farming collectives began to sue the federal government, saying, and this is, some of the language, well, because I'm not Black, a Black farmer, I am being left out, and this is racist legislation. Remember, I said it was farmers of color. That bill was for farmers of color, but Black farmers were signaled out. As a result of that, and the lawsuits, the judges felt that the lawsuits were actually something that was credible and it could move forward. All of that money was stopped. And so the farmers cannot access any of that money. But as Bob Marley says, when it rains, it doesn't rain on one man's house. It actually hurt the whole farming community with that pause. And so now white farmers are starting to foreclose on their homes, which is also part of this commercial monocrop system faltering as well. So right now, there are Black farmers that are starting to sue in order to hopefully unlock that money to get some type of relief aid. From what I understand, Vilsack and his aides are working to, in some way, get money to and work around that and navigate that. One of the issues is that the USDA has been so racist and so disingenuous and has ignored farmers of color, in particular Black farmers, that a lot of farmers, and this is not just Black farmers, the native farming community does not trust USDA as well. And so they're like, well, we want to work, but because of the history, we don't know how to cultivate some level of conversation and trust so we can get the proper aid to farmers. That was a good question. Thank you.
I just want to say this was a very good session. I really enjoyed it. I also had the privilege of living in Italy for about 3 years. And I remember when I first got there, I said I wanted a salad, and they went in the back and plucked it from the garden. And I was like, oh, okay. And when I went to get produce, they wouldn't let you touch the produce. I don't know how it is now, but back in 2007 in the market, you couldn't just, like in America, you feel and see which one is firm. They wouldn't let you do it. The farmer would pick it out for you, but you weren't allowed to touch it.
Mm-hmm. It's like that. It's still like that, especially when COVID hit. Mm-hmm. You had to be 6 feet from the produce. So part of the culture is, that's a really good point. So part of the culture in Italy, like food is community. So if you go to the same farmer every day, they'll pick out the best produce for you. You don't have to worry about it. So when I was in Italy, I had a place where I got my fruits and vegetables. I had a cheese maker, a bread maker. I'm not gonna lie, I had to have the wine maker. I had a bakery. So I had like all of these different facets of food that I would go to, and I'm from a big family. And so, Costco was my parents' best friend growing up. So, the Costco runs would like fill up, the station wagon. And so that's how, that's one of the things that I shop a lot, like a hoarder, right? Man, I remember the first time I spent like €100. My stuff was falling out the refrigerator. It rotted all in about 4 days because the food is just, GMO is illegal. And a lot of pesticides are illegal in Italy. So I'm trying to also bring that kind of food consciousness back.
And that leads me to my other question, because one thing I see there's a real big gap with this history in our history. I mean, the main thing that's sold during African-American history is always Martin Luther King's dream. You'll see that everywhere. But all these particular farmers, and you talk about the people who were intricate sources in the South that helped, that money probably helped people get out of jail when they got locked up marching, things of that nature. So my question is, Have you ever considered doing a podcast about this?
You know what? I wish I could, but you know, you see these gray hairs popping? Hey, I can't. I give it on to the young folk. I'll coach them all day, every day. And that's, I think, what we need to do. We need to actually pass on these skills to the younger people who have time, energy, and they can stay at their mama and daddy house, you know. So, but I think that definitely is worthy. That there are some podcasts actually that are already, but the media system is disrupted as well, too. So a lot of us are not getting the information. I wanted to say this, and I think I said this. So my mom from Louisiana, I was the last generation that had to go down south in the summer and get culture. And so I had to go to Lafayette every summer. I hated it, right? But now that I'm older, the jewels, my grandmother had a fig tree and she had a strawberry bush and she had a vegetable patch. And we had to pick from those. I had to learn how to, you know, preserve the figs. To this day, that's my favorite fruit are figs. So when I was in Italy, that's one of their main, oh my goodness. So one of the things, and this is because this language wasn't alive growing up. My grandmother lived in what would be considered a food desert. You had to walk several miles to the Piggly Wiggly in order to get food. So there was a farming family that had lost a significant amount of land, but the patriarch, Mr. Kaye, would be in a horse and buggy and would, you know, whatever he grew, he would go around to the old folk and sell the stuff. So in the morning time, when you would hear the horse, you know, my grandmother would tell me, go tell Mr. Kaye, I need, you know, my grandmother, her accent, I need 5 green peppers. I need some green onion. That's how my grandmother talked. And so we would have to go run. So these are things that we're going to have to actually reinstitute in our communities, because one of the things I learned, this goes back to Dr. Vickers, is that the elder community needs food on the north side of Wilmington, because they can't make that, especially in the era of COVID. Another thing that I found out is that in Wilmington, on the transportation, there was a 2-bag maximum. So you could only have 2 bags on the bus. So if you were from a big family, that's kind of hard, you know, to feed. I also want to say this, going back to North Carolina. So in New York, in Jersey, in Philly, and in Los Angeles, we had what you call the watermelon truck. I don't know if y'all heard about that. The watermelon man, the watermelons would come from the South in like these, you know, what do you call those yes, and there would be like mounds of watermelons, and they would just slowly drive around the community during the summertime. And that's how or sit up on a corner, and that's how you bought your watermelons. We didn't buy watermelons at the store. You know, our watermelons came from Texas. Texas watermelons were prized watermelons. Now that, you know, I'm on the East Coast, it's those Carolina watermelons that are prized watermelons. So I also want to talk about the connection that the migrant communities maintain through food. All right. Church as a trading post, flea markets, meat markets, we need it all. Okay. Have you looked at city growers or workers' gardens in a more urban environment? Great question, Michelle. Yes, I have. You will see more collective farms and community gardens in urban environments when we come to Black growers, because ownership of homes is an issue. So a lot of them are relying either on land that is provided by the city, or maybe somebody donated some land, or maybe there's a nonprofit that's donated some land. So you'll see we saw a lot of, especially in New York. New York had the highest number of community gardens and the highest concentration of it, because a lot of people are living in government housing projects or apartments. I mean, this is everybody. So we saw that there. Okay. Major health equity and access. This is something that's in the chat. Okay. Yeah. I was out Northside Food Co-op. I was there on Saturday. I met, I think, Evan And we talked extensively, and he's interested in doing like faith farming. Faith farming is churches getting involved in farming. There is, I forgot the brother's name, out of Baltimore, Virginia, really, Baltimore, Virginia area. And he saw that a lot of the community members were dying of diseases that were based because of lack of quality of food, diabetes, cancer, stroke, so on and so forth. So he started a garden and a system of farms where his congregation can buy from them. This is also the case in, I want to say, in somewhere in Indiana and somewhere in Tennessee, this idea of faith farms. How do I get in contact with them? So the best way right now is blackfarmersindex.com. Let me forewarn everybody, when it is growing season, it's hard to get in contact with the farmer. The best time to get in contact with them, we learned, is off season when they're not farming. They'll respond quickly because their money is made during growing season and they're very entrepreneurial. So if you don't get in contact, try again or work your way around it.
So in your presentation at the end, you encourage all of us to grow something.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious, knowing the food deserts, food shortages, and where we are, or where we're headed, what would you recommend that we start growing, given what's going on with the population today?
I'm laughing because everybody knows I kill everything. I can't even keep a cactus in my house. Okay, so that's the laugh. My sisters, they're more of, I'm the media person. What I was told was to start with things like herbs, and then work your way to maybe cherry tomatoes. But if you are in an apartment or anything like that, something that you can sit on a windowsill, just start like that. As well, farmers, if they see that you're serious, they're very helpful, in helping you in the process. That's how my sister started in Maryland. She really wanted to learn the art, and a lot of farmers across the ethnic racial range gave her seeds, tips, soil. That's one of the things, if you're a starting farmer, you will find out is that your soil will determine how your food tastes and the nutrients in it. So, you get, I wish I could talk more about it, but I'm totally ill-equipped. Yes, I will tear up an aloe vera plant in a minute. I'm ashamed, but I have to work on it. Maybe I need to be a rancher. Maybe I need to deal with goats. I don't know, we'll see. Or I'm a fisher. I'm a Cancer. I need to be up in that water. I need to catch some fish. That's what it is. I'll take that.
Dr. Shivers, this is Sean. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think is driving Gen Xers and millennials back into farming? I've noticed the trend also in theological circles. A lot of my colleagues who I went to seminary with have begun to open farms on ancestral land. So I'm wondering what's driving this, and will we see the boon of the small city, small town again out of it? Just curious.
You will definitely. So right now, you've already seen it with COVID. A lot of people left New York and the big cities for suburban towns or medium-sized towns. You already are starting to see that. Prior to COVID, I was actually working on a project about small towns and actually putting markets in it. So I was working on some stuff prior to COVID and prior to, anyway. So what drives power? Freedom. Those two things. And I'll explain why. Generation X follows the baby boomers. Oh, here's one of my sisters came in. Hi, Amara. I don't know if she's going to show herself, but we call her Pookie. Hey, Pookie. Okay. So anyway, after civil rights, which are the boomers, their children, the Gen Xers, which is myself and Sean, and millennials, which are my younger siblings, but particularly the Generation Xers, there was this assumption that we would inherit the activists, like inherit the spoils of the activist work that was done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. What we got was crack. we got arts pulled out of public school. We got the growth of suburbs and them driving highways through urban areas. A lot of people who lived in these areas, their houses were taken by eminent domain in order to set up these highways. I'm a film person. A lot of the theaters were removed. All of the recreational spaces were ripped pretty much out of the communities. And so Haiti, yep, little Haiti, yep, Haiti in Durham is one of these many districts or small towns that were self-sufficient. And like Watts and Compton was where middle-class Black people lived. You had doctors, nurses, and Watts. There were two sides because LA was heavily segregated. The 105 freeway, which connected white people living in the Inland Empire and going to the airport, went right through the Black community. There's no stops on the Black community. Right now on Crenshaw and Slauson, where Nipsey Hussle is, there's a metro rail from the airport to Crenshaw. It has devastated that community. And what I found out recently is that that area, South Los Angeles, is the largest, here we go, concentration of single-story Black-owned housing in the world. Not the country, not the state, single family. And so the Black owners are getting devastated. So what happens, you have these two generations that have high student loan debt, have all of this trauma. I'm from LA, this ground zero of crack. Overnight, a community was, you just don't even understand the devastation that happened in Los Angeles. That's why Maxine Waters, Auntie Maxine, she was actually supposed to charge the government with genocide, but she actually gave the information in order to keep Bill Clinton, that's a whole nother thing, in office when he got impeached. That's a whole other conversation. So here we are, a lot of us, our mortgage is our student debt. Our communities are decimated. We still have to deal with structural racism in our places of employment. We're not getting promoted. We are gradually getting sicker. And so farming becomes this space where you could grow something from a seed to something and not have to ask permission to do so. That is freedom right now for a lot of millennials and Gen Xers.
I really like the way you said that at the end. That was amazing. To being able to see the seed, because growing up, that's the thing that my parents had a small farm, and they canned plums and things of that nature. And what you grew in the summer, you didn't eat it in the summer. You had to wait till the winter. They'll freeze it, like strawberries, things of that nature. And if you snuck in there and ate the strawberries, you'd get in trouble because you weren't supposed to do those things. And now we live in this society where everything is like right there. You can just grab it. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying, where you can just walk into the Piggly Wiggly versus now you can just drive to the food line up the road, and I think getting back to that farming or getting back to that state of seeing something evolve would really bring a lot of peace to a lot of people, especially during the COVID season. I think this is my last one. I think I was in Japan where children, when they first get into school, in elementary school, they'll give them a seed to grow, to take care of, to help teach them responsibility throughout the year. And that's their goal, And I think that's some of the things we should introduce into our elementary schools to get them interested in this life of farming.
Yeah, and also I just want to say this, farming, when Black people began to migrate to the cities, there was a stigma placed on Black people in the South. I, experienced it in Los Angeles when my parents moved to Los Angeles and migrated there. I was 1 year old, but, I grew up with people, on my mom about her accent. I was talking to Dr. Harris about it. My mother taught Latin languages in high school. She was the first, and I think right now, maybe the only African-American woman to have taught several languages, Latin languages. And so anything that was attached to Southern life was considered backwards. Being from Louisiana, we were called voodoo. Oh, here we go. She gonna put them root on you. And so all those things connected to farming were lost because it didn't have any social, cultural currency in places like Harlem. And we lost that. And even me, I didn't like going to my grandmother's house in the summer because that meant I had to work. I had to get up in the heat and the mosquitoes and pick them figs, So I would also have to add that. So part of these Gen Xers and millennials returning back is also restoring cultural currency that was lost, which is going to have to be bi-directional. It's just not people coming from the North or the city. It's also people who are in the South. There must be some kind of connection.
Do you think the connection between Africa and the Caribbean has had a real big play on the way the food and produce? Because I know the Caribbean was like one of the first stops whenever through the Middle Passage, and there was an integration of sugar cane and things of that nature. And do you think the integration between those two cultures helped develop more different produce? And if there's any example, could you give it? I know we always say watermelon watermelon seeds are from Africa, but do you know if there was any cross plants that came from Africa and the Caribbean that we now eat?
I would say like the banana is something I remember I had a Haitian boyfriend and there was like a name they had for, it wasn't a plantain, but it was a mashed banana. And I said it to my grandmother. Her first language was Creole and she knew exactly what it was. So there are definitely some cross migration, specifically in Wilmington is a very special place as well. But there are still, so let me tell you this, there's so much that we have got to learn that we're still discovering a lot of the information and what that looks like. But like pineapple, I think it was called banane pelé, or I forgot the name of it, but there definitely is. I don't know that, I don't have that information. I wish I did. Bene seeds, okay. I've never heard of that. Sweet potato, there you go. Yam, yes. And sugar cane, yes, yeah, all of these. Thank you community for adding to that. I don't know how much time we have. We've been here and I don't want to overextend the talk. So I'll take one more question or one more comment. And then if there's anything that you have, my UNCW email is shiversk. All right, it's shiversk@uncw.edu. Now I'm still trying to get access to it. So give me, I'm working on it. So I might not respond this week, but next week, okay, I think I should be rolling.
And real quick, Manny, he planned the program to, it's scheduled to go until like 7:30. So you still got some time.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm open. So I see Amara, my sister, is on. Amara, I don't know if she might be chiming in. Amara?
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes. Do you have anything to add?
I do not. My apologies. I'm still at work, so I was able to kind of like step away just to kind of join, but I do not have anything to add at this time.
Thank you. She's in LA. She's on the West Coast, so that's why. Thank you, Pookie. That's what we call her. Every Black family got Pookie. I don't care what you say. Okay, Bahati has a question in Alexandria. Bahati?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to say thank you for this presentation. It's been incredible. I'm calling in from Chicago. I heard about it on Instagram, and so I tuned in. So just going back to your social media skills, very, very well done. And so I'm working here on a project focused on urban growers, and everything that you've said has either really underscored or made the information and work that we're doing here even more urgent. I think, especially when thinking about Chicago being near one of the largest freshwater sources in the world, and from an environmental perspective, you know, water is running out as well. And so,
Yeah.
when you're talking about protectionism,
Mhm.
like the farmers being very protective of their information and the ways that they do their work, and then this idea of collective care and forced self-reliance, these are ideas that we're working on the project, or we're thinking about on the project that I'm working on. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what have been the resources that farmers, especially Black farmers, have been able to access from an institutional systems level, that they feel as though, you know, their privacy is being respected, and also it takes into account that historical trauma that has happened, that has led them to being this kind of, like, you know, really quite separated from the work that's happening overall.
That's an excellent question. I'm going to answer it as best as I can because I don't have all of the answer, but I just think every answer is fluid. We add and subtract to it. Yeah, so I don't, if you sat in, like, I have family somewhere in that area. So you have my heart, Chicago, CHICAGO. I went to FAMU. That's how the Chicago people came through. But so let me first say this. In my opinion, HBCUs, the agricultural programs at HBCUs have been quite effective. There are some food justice organizations that have serviced the farmers. The biggest problem, a lot of these are very local specific. And so what we try to do is address something that was more nationwide. I don't know what the answer is, or what organization where farmers feel like their privacy is protected and respected. I will say this, there is a data grab that is going on Black farmers. We've had to engage with several people and organizations who have pilfered the information off of the Black Farmers Index and had said it was their own, to the point of a brewery located in North Carolina called us and told us that there's an organization going around with our information, using it in order to get business. And when she said, this looks like Black Farmers Index, they were like, oh, those people are no good. So data is a thing right now, especially me being media. It's all about data and information. And so we need to figure out, that's one of the things that we need to figure out, and that we're working on Black Farmers Index, is how do we get business to these farmers who just want to grow food? I don't think that should be an issue if all they want to do is grow food. One of the solutions that we heard, there is, like I said her name, Jillian Hishaw. She's an attorney, but she represents farmers and helps them with their contracts with producers or restaurants. And that's all we know thus far. That is an area that is still untapped. I know that is a partial answer, but that is an answer I think that we are still unfolding.
I think that the data piece is exactly what we're understanding right now as well, and trying to wrap our minds around, like, how does data work when you're thinking about, and earlier when I came in, you were just talking about how the solutions have to be, you know, much more broad and considerate when you're thinking about equity and justice. Is that once you're thinking about that, it goes beyond just urban growing. It's about economic justice. It's about, reparations and restorative justice, so on and so forth. And so thinking about the dominant ways or the dominant culture that data is defined in, it's very difficult to think about, what does scale actually mean for minority farmers, right?
Right,
What does
and that hasn't,
economic-
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's a
Oh,
good
no,
point.
you
That
want-
hasn't been adequately answered. Like, what does scale mean? Because the USDA has been so distant from Black farmers. Several people in USDA, even Black people in the USDA, are trying to figure out what Black farmers are. The first thing is that Black farmers are heterogeneous. And a lot of people don't know farmers got beef like hip hop. Some, I'm serious. I was like, this is it. So you can't even have one plan for a Black farmer because there are and it's very regionalized. It's tribalism. You know what I'm saying? And I talked about this with a Native man in the USDA, and we were talking about how things are very hyper regionalized. There's such a grab for resources because there's been such a lack thereof. So there's a lot of things that have got to be worked out with that. So the last thing a Black farmer wants to hear is somebody, with a Yankee accent, even though all farmers now are not located in the South, even though majority of Black farmers are coming and talking, about what we're doing. Oh, we want to get your information. What for? Because this is another thing. It's still, I got this report recently. Black farmers are being intimidated and harassed since the stimulus bill that was supposed to have money for farmers of color. That's a very real thing in North Carolina, actually, right now, too. So that's why I was like, communities have got to create some type of health, security, and economic system around farmers, because if we can't eat, we're not going to live. That's what it is. And let me say this, if Black farmers die out, the whole nation's farming system will go bankrupt, even though they're only 1%, because they are the core and the heart. And USDA understands that. Okay, I'm sorry. Alexandria, I'm sorry. Alexandria.
Oh, hello. It was more so kind of a question / comment. Earlier, did you say that you had family like on your dad's side from Foxworth, Mississippi?
Vicksburg.
Oh, sorry. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I also have family from Mississippi as well. Me and my siblings and my dad were all born there. And my grandmother, she lives there. And I remember like you were talking about like growing, and someone mentioned something about like summers of like picking stuff from like their garden stuff. And so like my grandma does a lot of that. She's not a farmer, but she has like a lot of land where she like grows a lot of things. And so it's kind of cool like hearing from multiple generations of like the experience of doing that. Cause I mean, from North Carolina and Mississippi, I'm from Raleigh in North Carolina. So it's like totally different, just the environment. So also going back to my comment about like what we talk about, I really do appreciate your presentation on this, because it's really nice to hear from like a Black woman speak on this. Because as much as I love public health, I mean, it's only so much they can speak on as far as like health equity and access and like food deserts and stuff. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you. This meeting is recorded and it will be shared, Bahati. Thank you so much. I was shocked. That's one of the pieces of information that we at Black Farmers Index. About 40% of the farms represented on our index are either owned solely by a woman, or maybe it's a couple or a family. So, Black women are very much still embedded in farming. Dr. Harris and I were talking about that. If you're talking about from Mississippi, Louisiana, North Carolina, you're talking about even in Chicago, Black people are still very much invested in herbal remedies, teas and salves and different things like that. So you'll have that one or two people in your family, that you go to and ask about that. It might be growing some ginger. Like, I don't know about y'all, but on the Black circuit, when that Rona hit, that turmeric and ginger and lemon was like all the rage, and people were like, where you get that turmeric? You know what I'm saying? Which actually is a Caribbean thing, if you want to talk about that. Well, it's technically Asian, but it goes to the Caribbean, you know what I mean. So, so your grandmother, even though she grows things, I'm pretty sure that's one of the practices. So she might not be selling, but she probably gives a lot of her produce away. Or there might be an understanding of the community that you can go into Mrs. Jones's yard and pick some fruit, pick some apples, and pick some blackberries. So those are those type of families as well in the farming community that we still have in some spaces. Thank you, Alexandria. Hey, cousin. All right.
Dr. Shivers, your research is quite all-encompassing in many different ways. How in the world were you able to get so entrenched in North Carolina and this community? You were in Italy for 2 years. You're coming out of New York from Los Angeles, and yet you're able to speak about North Carolina better than I can. So what are you up to? What are your projects?
I don't even know how to start to answer that. How did I, well, one, my husband's mother's side are from North and South Carolina. And so what we know, for those of us who live in the South, I mean, every time, if you're not Caribbean in New York, you from the Carolinas or Georgia, it's like, or Florida. So the migrations patterns, or maybe some people from Virginia too, the migration patterns, as a matter of fact, so I came to UNCW specifically several years ago upon the invitation of Director Palmer on my film work that I do. I'm actually to date the only Black ethnographer in the United States to have conducted a study on film that looks at all three communities, Black American, Caribbean, and African in the United States, and how they negotiate identity using filmic texts. And so when I came to UNCW, I was working on a documentary called Orisha in the Ghetto, which is a series. Orisha, for those of you who are not familiar, comes from the Yoruba people. It is their pantheon. So you know how like the Greeks have Zeus and what are these other people? I don't even know, Venus, Athena. Yes, thank you, Sean. Yes, Well, before that, there were the Orisha, Shango, Oshun, Yemanja, Oya, so on and so forth. And so I've been doing work on Nigeria, wow, for over 2 decades. And I've traveled to Nigeria and I've reported on Nigeria. So I know it in some ways. 20 years ago, I wrote a poem. I was a poet. Well, I still am, but I don't do, all your creative work goes into your job when you get older, as we all know. Okay, so I said, what would Shango look like on South Side Chicago? What would Oshun look like in Watts? So I created this, I had this idea, and years later, I'm doing Orisha in the Ghetto. So I brought the first pilot to UNCW, and wherever I go, where there's a Black community, I investigate. And it just so happened I was talking about these communities we talked about earlier that were disemboweled by white supremacy. And I had learned about UNCW's 1898 massacre. And I began to interview people and the community and began to go to the sites, the cemetery, the places where they had the big gun where they just mass killed people. And I began to hear all these stories, and I said, Wilmington must be a part. So I've been going back and forth. And then another thing is that at the time I was in Newark, one of the refuge was Jersey, and there's actually a whole town called Whitesboro that was created from Wilmingtonians, Black Wilmingtonians who left and ran and formed this whole community in South Jersey called Whitesboro. And I just started to dig my heels in Wilmington, and in my opinion, Wilmington is a template, not Black Wall Street, but more so Wilmington, in my opinion, represents kind of what Black sustainability looked like before these terroristic takeovers. So this is how I'm in North Carolina, and I've been rocking with it since.
They migrated from Wilmington, North Carolina, not Wilmington, Delaware, right?
Yeah, nah,
I'm
not
teasing,
Wilmington.
I'm teasing, I'm teasing.
I might as well be in Carolina if I'm going to be in Delaware.
Mhm.
Everything. Everything is from the Carolinas.
That's exactly right, Sean. That's exactly right.
And also, I just want to say this. I know we're ending. North Carolina has this very fascinating history of in Yoruba, they call it Egungun masquerade. In North Carolina, they call it Junkanu, which is a term from the Bahamas. But this is African and Native indigenous ceremony rituals of celebrating ancestors, history, harvest. You brought out the masquerades when you had like these very huge communal events. So when the harvest was finished, you brought out the masquerade. When somebody had a baby, you brought out the masquerade. When you were grieving for somebody who died, you brought out the masquerade. When the seasons changed, you brought out the masquerade. And Wilmington had the masquerade. That's fascinating to me. But what I was told in conversation with somebody was that the masquerade is considered like this slave, downtrodden, voodoo riddled, jigaboo thing. And I was like, you don't understand, but this is part of the work that I do. In order to reclaim or heal in Wilmington, Black folk need to reclaim their culture in Wilmington. And that is some serious ancestral power to reclaim that and know what it is. And that's what happened in Louisiana. It happened in Louisiana too. My grandmother, practiced the ancient arts, did not know that until she was over 90 years old. That's because we were taught that it was demonic. It's not demonic. Get out of here. Okay. Second line in Louisiana, yes. Yes, indeed. Twerking, twerking, booty popping, as they say, right? Twerking. Twerking, I'm sorry, Dr. Fickers, I'll just say this and I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it where it's at, right? Twerking comes from the sex workers in New Orleans who were dressed as babies. They call them the baby dolls. And before the big Mardi Gras happened, they would walk around the red light district with a man dressed as a skeleton. That's a legba. That's what they call it at the cross. Who's the person at the crossroads? Totally. And the women would gyrate and pop their derrieres. And they would, this is so rooted in not just West African, but African culture of this intersection of the sacred and the secular. Like the body is sacred. The body is sacred. And so the exaggeration of the breasts and the butts moving was actually a kind of like a praise worship dance. That was the original praise, was popping that thing. So anyway, I'm gonna leave with that. I'm gonna stop with that. I have a trap and bounce talk coming up. That's when I could really get it. But I thank you all so much. This is actually my first formal talk about Black farmers. And so you've given me a lot to think about and do more research on. Thank you.
Where would the recording be located?